What if I told you that for some people, language isn't just for talking? It's a legal and spiritual discipline, a world where every single word is a binding act, and the way you speak could actually determine your authority and your liability. Okay, let's dive into this pretty fascinating idea.
This quote, right here, it gets to the absolute heart of it. It comes from a manual called The Language of Trust, and it introduces this really powerful concept, the total separation of a person from their official role. You see, the person, they're temporary, but the office is designed to be permanent, and that means it has to have its own unique voice. So here's how we're going to break this all down. We'll start with the core philosophy, then we'll get into the two different voices. After that, we'll dissect an official document, look at some common mistakes, get into why this all matters so much, and then wrap it up with this idea of the unbroken record.
All right, first up, the language of trust itself. What we're really looking at here is a very, very specific system for communication. It's laid out in a manual for trustees, and in their world, every word is treated like a formal, binding act. No exceptions.
And just so you know where this all comes from, it's this source text right here, The Language of Trust by Oba Nithnell. It's really interesting because it's not written for lawyers, but for regular people who want to master a kind of communication that carries just immense weight.
And this is where the rubber really meets the road. We're not just talking about sounding professional here. In this system, your words have actual, tangible power. A formal notice can literally create a legal right. A letter can transfer property. And get this, even your silence can be interpreted as consent. So you can see why mastering this language is considered absolutely essential.
Okay, so let's get to the core discipline of this whole system. It's this idea of separating the office voice from the living voice. Honestly, if you can get your head around this one distinction, everything else is going to click into place.
So what even is the office? Well, the manual defines it as the functional seat of authority. Think of it like a role, like the presidency or a judgeship. It's got its own duties, its own records, and it's totally impersonal. It exists completely separate from the person who's currently holding that title. That person is just a temporary steward, a caretaker.
And this slide just breaks down the difference perfectly. On one side, you've got the living voice. It's personal. It says I, me, my. It speaks from personal experience, and you'd use it for, say, sworn testimony. But here's the kicker. It creates personal liability. Now, the office voice, totally different. It's impersonal. It speaks for the record, not from opinion. It's for administration, and its whole purpose is to protect the trust by keeping everything formal and separate.
So now that we have the theory, let's see how this all looks on paper. Section 3, the anatomy of an official document. Because in this system, it's not just what you say. The structure, the very form of the document is just as important as the words themselves.
You can see that a communication from the office is put together with incredible precision. The heading makes it clear it's from the office, not a person. Then you've got a reference line, which links this document to a permanent record, like a ledger. The body just states facts, no emotion, totally neutral. The closing clause, with phrases like without prejudice, basically builds a jurisdictional fence around the document. And finally, that signature block identifies the office, making it an official act, not a personal one.
So what happens when you mess this up? Well, that brings us to Section 4. We're going to look at some common errors, especially this trap of what's called mixed voice. That's when you blend the living voice with the office voice, and it can undo all the protections we just talked about.
This table is such a great summary. Okay, look at the first one. The error is saying, I require payment. The problem, you just made it personal. You've opened yourself up to personal liability. The correction is to say, the office gives notice. See the difference? Same thing with emotional words like failed or a personal closing like sincerely. The corrected versions are always neutral, factual, and point right back to the authority of the office.
Now, all of this might seem ridiculously formal, almost like overkill, right? But there is a very clear, very strategic reason for all of it. So let's get to the big question. Why does this disciplined voice matter so much?
And here it is. This is the payoff. Using this language establishes a private jurisdiction. It shields the trustee from personal liability. It also proves a consistent intent to act only as a trustee, not as just some individual. And maybe most importantly, every single communication builds on the last, creating this solid, clear, defensible record of good administration that can stand up to any scrutiny.
And that brings us to our final section, the unbroken record. This is really about the long game, the big picture. It's about creating a living, breathing memory
for the trust itself.
This right here, this is the whole philosophy in a nutshell. The meticulously kept record becomes the trust's memory. The goal is for it to be so clear, so complete, that it can basically testify on its own behalf long after any of the people involved are gone. The record itself becomes this permanent, self-defending thing.
And this timeline just shows you exactly how that's supposed to work. Trustee number 1 starts it all, creates the record. Trustee number 2 inherits it and continues in the exact same voice. Fast forward a few generations, the people have all changed, but the trust's authority, its voice, it remains consistent and unbroken. The office endures.
So it all leaves you with this one final thought, right? This whole system is this wild case study in separating a person from their role. And it just makes you wonder how much of what we think of as authority is not really about raw power at all, but about the structure, the discipline, and the very specific language we choose to use?